hopefully the rest of the senators will trickle in here. And we'll start with, are there any bill introductions? You got a bill introduction, Senator Fausto? Okay. She got here just in time.
Oh, boy.
I'll let you catch your breath.
Okay, here we go.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have two bill introductions. One is RS 2698, and that is concerning veterans relating to identification cards to be mailed to the Wichita Dole Institute for them to use that location. These are for homeless vets to use that location as a mailing. And
okay. Any questions or objections to introduction of that bill, committee? Seeing none, that bill's introduced.
And Mr. Chairman, the other bill introduction is RS 2687, and it's for feminine, a tax exempt for feminine products. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions or objections to introduction of that bill? Seeing none, that's introduced. Any other bill introductions, audience or the, Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a bill introduction. It's 24 RS 2756. It's an act concerning first responders relating to law enforcement officers and emergency medical service providers.
Committee, any questions or objections to introduction of that bill? Seeing none, that is introduced. Any further bill introductions? Seeing none, we will move on to our hearing and open the hearing for House Bill 2446 and ask Jason, our revisor, to come up and give us a briefing on the bill. Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2446 would create new state law prohibiting cities and counties from regulating the use of containers for food, beverages, and merchandise. The prohibition would apply to any container, regardless of the material it is made from, when that container is used for the consumption, transportation, or protection of any food, beverages, or merchandise. This includes such products at the manufacturing level, processing, distribution, and retail sales. In any of those cases, the containers cannot be regulated. The bill also specifically points out plastic straws could not be regulated by cities or counties under House Bill 2446. The anti-regulation provision basically prohibits those municipalities from adopting any law or regulation that restricts, taxes, prohibits, or otherwise regulates these containers. I will point out there were a couple amendments by the House Committee on Federal State Affairs, one of which is to also include language you can see on the bill. Page 1, line 26 also restricts municipalities from imposing any charge or fee on the use of these containers. And then there's another amendment by the House Committee with respect to some of the exemptions that are allowed under the bill, and I'll get to those in just a minute. But that's a general prohibition under House Bill 2446, any regulation of these containers. The bill does allow a city or county to operate a recycling, composting, or solid waste disposal program. It does allow the regulation of the use of these containers on property that is owned or maintained by the city or county. It doesn't impact the city or county's ability to impose their general sales and use taxes on the sale of the products. It doesn't restrict the city or county from prohibiting littering, and they can still prohibit littering. And it also allows cities and counties to regulate the use of glass containers that are on the property owned or maintained by the municipality based on public safety concerns. And then finally allows cities and counties to set reasonable standards for the regulation of alcoholic liquor possession as required by state law. So those are some of the areas where cities and counties could still provide some a form of indirect regulation of the containers. They just can't prohibit their use or otherwise regulate their use or tax or impose any fees or charges on the use of these containers. The bill would go into effect July 1st of this year if it's enacted, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Committee, any questions? Senator Faust-Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Jason, so this bill, when did it have a hearing in the House, and what was it voted on?
I believe it had a hearing last session in 2023. It's a holdover bill. I'd have to look at the date and what the final action was in the House, but we can definitely get that information to you here in a few minutes.
Follow up? Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Jason. So currently, so we'd be taking away the local control somewhat, but currently, what's the process? So how much are the containers, what is the price that's charged for those containers now?
Well, currently the containers, any regulation of these containers is subject to local jurisdiction. Some communities have imposed certain regulations, some haven't. It's a bit of a patchwork across the state at this point. And those regulations, generally involve like limiting the use or regulating or prohibiting the use of certain containers. Potentially, I'll let the conferee speak more specifically to the issues that they're seeing in their communities, but right now there is no restrictions on cities and counties regulating these particular products.
And I think Elena has the answer to when it was heard in the House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there was a hearing in the House on March 15th, 2023, and it was passed on the House floor on March 27th, and it was a vote of 72 to 51.
Okay. Any other questions, committee, for Jason? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Appreciate it very much. All righty. As I explained earlier, we're going to start with the oral proponents. We'll have 15 minutes for that entire group, and then about 5 minutes for questions from the committee. And so our first oral proponent is Eric Stafford from the Kansas Chamber, and I'll let you get up and settled, and we'll start the clock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Good morning. Eric Stafford, Vice President of Government Affairs with the Kansas Chamber. Zach with the Sierra Club said I can have his 15 minutes, so I'll take my time going through the details here. 2446 is a kind of a repeat bill for you guys in the legislature, very similar to Senate Bill 493, which was vetoed in 2022 from Governor Kelly or by Governor Kelly. But this is an issue that at the time was intended to be preemptive statewide, but now since the city of Lawrence has passed an ordinance that goes into effect March 1, this is kind of a more time-sensitive matter than what it used to be, where cities and counties across the state or country even are banning the use of single-use plastic bags or containers. And what this bill does, I think to Senator Faust-Godot's question in terms of fees or anything like that, Lawrence doesn't have a tax or anything, it just prohibits it. Which can put businesses at a disadvantage. So if my business is within city limits, but my competitors is outside of city limits, then they don't necessarily have to follow the ban. So what we're trying to do is, the word patchwork was said during the description of the bill, and that's exactly what we're trying to prevent, is a patchwork of laws dealing with prohibiting perfectly legal, safe products from the ability for consumers to carry their merchandise in. Just a timely news article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, they were reporting on a study from the state of New Jersey, which in 2020 prohibited plastic bags and the single-use plastics in all stores and food service businesses in their state. That went into effect in May of 2022. And that study has shown that the bags that you now buy at the grocery store, when you're facing those plastic bag single-use bans, while they've had a 60% reduction in the use of plastic bags in New Jersey, the use of plastics has actually increased by 3 times because the multiple use bags that you're buying from the stores contain plastics. But it contains more plastics, which actually has a higher carbon footprint to produce than the single-use plastic bag. So the actual efforts from the environmental groups to restrict consumer choice and freedom and business freedom is backfiring on their ultimate goals. There's also a link in our PDF testimony for a Greenpeace report that was released in October of 2022, which basically concluded that the war on plastics is futile and worthless. When the city of Lawrence passed their ordinance, there was a picture I saw on Twitter from an op-ed that was basically saying, so I'm buying all these food products wrapped in plastic containers, but I can't carry it in a plastic bag home, all under the guise of saving the environment. So we believe that humans in general largely want to ensure that the world remains a clean place to live. I think we all like living in clean spaces, but this effort here really just puts a strain on businesses and makes it more costly for businesses and consumers to comply with. So I will save time for other conferees. If you look on page 2 of our testimony, you'll see a map of states that have passed uniformity standards, which is similar to House Bill 2446. Where we're trying to create a uniform standard by which to operate across the state. So we would hope to join those lists of, or the number of red states that are on that map to keep this policy at the state level and rather than the local level. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time, and thank you for the hearing today.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, we'll open for questions at the end of the 15 minutes. Up next is Brian Postler, Executive Director of Fuel True Independent Energy and Convenience.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to the committee. Thank you for taking testimony from me today. Fuel True Independent Energy and Convenience, we are the statewide nonprofit trade association that works with all the distributors for energy, as well as the voice of over 2,000 retailers who sell gasoline and gasoline products. This bill is important to us because we greatly value consistency. Having the challenge of having to navigate a different set of rules and regulations on every single ordinance of every single community would be incredibly costly, time-consuming, and difficult for our members to navigate. This bill would ban these municipal-specific approaches and put us in favor of a more statewide, consistent approach. Now, opponents of this bill are going to talk about home rule and how important it is that individual communities should decide for themselves whether they have plastic bags. I actually am a proponent of home rule on many situations, but I think the long-term evidence is really clear that environmental solutions are not solved easily or appropriately by a municipality approach. The air moves across municipal boundaries. The water is shared by many municipalities. A statewide approach is a much more effective way to handle environmental regulations. And my retailers can live with any statewide sort of solution because that gives us consistency. So if we want to solve the problem of the hazards of plastic bags in the state of Kansas, we should do it at the state level, make it consistent all the way across. It will be more effective, and it will be less costly and more difficult, less difficult for our retailers to navigate. Finally, this bill has no fiscal impact on the state. It would definitely have a positive fiscal impact on our retailers, because if our members have stores in 20 different communities, they're going to have to figure out all the different rules and regulations as they get set each time, and we've got to have different bags. We buy bags by the pallet, right? And so trying to figure out which stores should have which exact pieces of single-use materials is just going to be difficult for us to navigate. So our plea for you is please join your colleagues in the House, pass this bill, and get it to the governor's desk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Up next, Scott Schneider. And we've used about 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes. You still have 7, 8 minutes left.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Scott Schneider on behalf of the Kansas Restaurant and Hospitality Association, thank you for having me. I just want to add 2 points that restaurants are hyper-competitive, and we're going to do everything we can to mirror our customers' needs and desires to entice them to come shop at our spot. If they want different types of environmental products, I think many of the restaurants know their customers and they'll find them. And I think that's the approach that the state needs to have, that let these businesses compete on the terms that the customers dictate. And I think that's the appropriate space. In my testimony, I put some numbers, some year-over-year numbers, just so you can see how fluid the inflation rates are in different categories. So one of the categories is paper indispensable items. It fluctuates from 15% in 1 month and down in January of, this is a 2023 number, it was down to 7. So the price points of these different products are very important to allow these local small businesses to make decisions on their own behalf. Through COVID, we lost about 800 restaurants. We're coming back. The employment is kind of stabilizing. But the pressures that the smallest businesses are under, I think, are important. The second piece that I want to talk about is the mechanism that preemption provides. Jack Glaves was a dear friend of mine, and he's passed now, but in the late 50s, he was on local government committee as a legislature, and he said it was miserable. He goes, there were so many bills coming their way because local governments didn't have the tools to take action themselves. So something had to change because we couldn't get to the bar in time. So that's where you get in the 1960s, the home rule idea that local governments had to have authority to stop coming to Topeka to ask to move a road or annex a piece of property or do things that needed to be done locally. The solution was uniformity. That's the mechanism provided by the 1960 constitutional amendment of home rule that creates Kansas is still a sovereign entity. We didn't create sovereign states through localities. Kansas is still needs to have control over this uniformity idea, and this is the appropriate mechanism to get us to where we want to be. With that, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Final, we're still about 5.5 minutes left here for Dan Murray, National Federation of Independent Business. Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan Murray, Kansas State Director for National Federation of Independent Business. NFIB represents about 4,000 small business owners from across the state, all kinds of folks, including retailers and restaurateurs, et cetera. I'm going to take about 5.5 minutes to finish this out. No, I'm kidding. Listen, I think that a lot of folks back home certainly are well-intentioned when they seek these bans. I think they have their heart and minds in the right space. We just disagree with maybe why they are seeking these bans. I think certainly my colleagues preceding me in testifying have pointed out all the points that I would have made in my testimony, but I want to point out the patchwork impact that it could have without invoking exactly where they stand on this issue. I want to put forward an example. Johnny's restaurant, which is started in Lawrence, North Lawrence, has 2 locations there, a couple locations in Kansas City. They have a fine location here in Topeka. If they are restricted on their plastic ban in Lawrence, for example, on what they can do with their plastic containers, what does that mean on how they comply and purchase what they do in Johnson County, in Topeka? The compliance mechanism is difficult alone, but also supply chain really impacts small business owners more than it does our larger competitors. We buy not on the volume that some of the folks do at the larger level. So the impact on small businesses with these kinds of bans is certainly, I think, more impactful to small business owners than it is to our larger competitors. So we seek a solution, and we have done this. This is not the first time we've asked for the state to step in and ask for statewide approach to certain things that impact small business owners. We have statewide bans on local ordinances on various other things, minimum wage, et cetera. So this is not out of step, out of line. We've done it before, and we'd urge you to do this in this case as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it very much. Appreciate it very much, Dan. Forgot to turn on my mic. You guys did that in about 11 minutes and 50 seconds. That's very succinct. We appreciate that. Committee, we're going to open it up to questions. Try to hold it to 5 minutes or so, and so make your questions succinct so we can get the oral opponents in here as well. So committee, any questions from our group? Senator Faust-Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hate for people to testify before this committee and not ask them a question. So my question would be for Dan. So you gave a scenario of a real life situation, or I don't know if you made it up or not, but no, Dan, I know you wouldn't do that. But so give us a real example of what's happening now, and you want exactly what in layman's terms for those listening. I know a lady in Wichita, Lori Lawrence, and she goes out on a regular basis picking up plastic bags and cups from just everywhere. It's like, I don't know. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, thank you for the question. So as an example, and again, I don't know where Johnny stands on this, but I use them as an example because I thought that maybe some of us here in this room know that they have a place here in Topeka. They've got places, some locations in Johns County. And I can defer to Mr. Schneider about maybe the restaurant supply chain issues that they face. But for example, in Lawrence, if they have to comply with a plastic container ban in Lawrence, that means they have to find a separate vendor to buy, paper products, for example, for their business in Lawrence, and then have separate vendors to buy their plastic products for all their other locations in various jurisdictions throughout the state. Small businesses benefit from leveraging by buying in bulk and having sensible, reasonable solutions that are done with one vendor instead of having to try to comply with different patchwork of regulations. So that's the concern we have. And listen, I think we call these single-use containers, but I don't know one person that doesn't use their plastic bags for other uses. I have dogs, leave it at that. Also use these plastic bags. I return mine to Hy-Vee in Lawrence and recycle them there. These are not necessarily single-use bags, and they're lower cost, and ultimately our folks in Kansas, your constituents, are going to pay more if we impose these kinds of bans locally.
Okay. Senator Clues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question's for Eric Stafford. Thank you. Can you tell me, you mentioned Lawrence as being one city, municipality that is about to have this law go in effect against. How many other cities in Kansas are looking at something like this? Do you know?
I don't know how many are looking at them. None have passed one other than the city of Lawrence at this time. But again, I'll reference that we have been introducing this legislation for a few years now. When Zero had them, knowing what was happening across the country, kind of like in 2013 when we preempted local governments from passing paid sick leave or paid minimum wages, because that was a growing trend, and then 3 years later it became part of a party's platform at the national level for the presidential campaign. So we took that ability away from the local level to regulate employment law, keep that as state level, and this is the same type of approach. We believe that for commerce situations, I think Scott laid it out perfectly on the intent and purpose of home rule is for uniformity, not to have different laws in different places that impact commerce at the local level.
So you only know really of one city that's going to implement this?
They have implemented it, just they delayed the effect until March 1 of 2024.
Okay. And then, Mr. Chairman, just one follow-up. So in your opinion then, how would this affect like vendors in, should this go and take play, how would this affect vendors transporting? I know there's a lot with supply, demand, and fuel costs, and in your opinion, how would that affect vendors that have to go to different?
Yeah, I was just looking up the ordinance. Let me get it pulled back up again in my history. Just a second. Basically, the ordinance as described is that it prohibits establishments in Lawrence from providing single-use plastic bags to customers. The ordinance will affect all establishments that make bags available at the point of sale, distribution, or other departure point. So it sounds like distribution is a part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Blaze, we've got time for one more question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a simple yes or no questions for actually Mr. Murray. Just wanting for clarification, we know we've heard a lot from constituents who are struggling to pay their grocery bills. You know, with inflation, it's really hurting folks everywhere, whether it's going out to eat or grocery store. So just so I'm clear, when communities ban plastic bags, businesses are required to go find more costly measures for bags, and therefore all those prices are going to be pushed on to consumers who are already struggling to pay their groceries?
Yes.
Thank you.
All righty. That's all the time we have for the questions for our oral group. We do have committee written proponents. We have 4 different proponents who have offered written testimony, so make sure you review that. We have 2 neutral conferees today. One is written and one is oral. We've got Terry Humphrey. Terry, I'll give you a couple minutes here to speak, and then we'll open for questions from Terry.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chairman Thompson and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present testimony. I am Terry Humphrey, Executive Director of Kansas Pet Advocates, a nonprofit membership organization working to elevate the standards of care for pets in Kansas. Today, we are representing our coalition members and partners, which includes animal shelters, rescues, and commercial pet entities. As the bill is written, the Kansas Pet Advocates are neutral on House Bill 2446, but oppose any attempt to expand it to include consumer merchandise or services. The Kansas Pet Advocates support local government's right to solve local problems locally. While we have no specific interest in plastic bags or auxiliary containers, we believe that this is a potential vehicle for further amendment. Last session, 2 bills attempted to prohibit local government from regulating the sale of consumer merchandise and services. Senate Bill 47 was one such bill, and it was heard in the Senate Commerce Committee, and it did not advance from there. Also in the House Federal and State Affairs Committee, they did pass House Bill 2447, which included a preemption from regulating consumer products and services. However, that bill remains on House general orders. We believe that if this bill were to be expanded, it would have very serious unintended consequences. I want to just give you a little history. The catalyst last year for adding that language was due to a conversation that was occurring in Wichita in 2022. This was a conversation among constituents about a pet overpopulation problem, and there was concern and discussion about the possibility of banning the sale, retail sale, from pet stores of puppies and kittens. However, what's important is that that conversation never developed and never went on to the city council members. So, again, in closing, we believe that local government should have the right in order to solve local problems locally, and we'd like you to consider that strongly today. But in addition to my testimony and those who've signed on, I would like to also express that the American Lung Association shares our concerns and has requested to join our testimony today. So in closing, I would like to ask this committee to ensure that there are no attempts to expand this particular piece of legislation. Thank you for your consideration, and please note the signer's on. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We will move on now to our oral opponents, and again, set the clock for 15 minutes. And we'll start off with Zach Pastoria, Sierra Club. Zach, you're up, and we'll start the clock.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Honored to be before you and having a little deja vu. We've had 4 bills of these kinds over the last 4 years. So my joke is we're recycling the legislation more than we are the bags. But it's hard to know what to say to you all in a short amount of time. You know, I could talk about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that's in the ocean, 8 times bigger than the land area of Kansas, mostly plastic debris, the 1 to 2 million tons of plastics that flow down our rivers into our waterways from America into our oceans every year, the fact that these plastic containers are used for minutes but they don't degrade, they last for hundreds if not thousands of years. That plastics are harming our bodies by leaching toxic chemicals, that it's the second most landfilled item of any material besides food, but it's the least recycled and most burned as far as packaging and containers. And we could debate about whether plastic bag bans work. You heard about New Jersey. They've saved 5.5 billion plastic bags since enacting their plastic bag ban across the state, and 12 states have such bans in 500 cities. But I think at the core of the issue in my mind of nearly the 5,000 Kansas Sierra Club members that care about the environment is why state lawmakers, those who represent constituents from other communities, support a bill to stop a Kansas town from doing something positive and proactive to address environmental problem they care about. We're talking about the community of Lawrence, who had God-fearing residents, a volunteer advisory board who cares about sustainability, and even a class of 4th graders and other citizen support who urged their elected leaders for years to do something about the plastics issue. And their elected leaders responded democratically. And now we want to look past the local control spirit of the Kansas Constitution, statutory powers, and even the party platform for some, for the benefit of who? A self-serving benefit for businesses that can't offer you a real example how it might harm them. We got Aldi in Lawrence. We have my local grocery store, the Merck, they don't hand out plastic bags. They're doing just fine. I bet Rick and Nancy at Johnny's can figure it out. They got different demographics, local taxes, specials in Lawrence. They do it out in Kansas City. If these bags and containers, plastic, not only harm our communities and our ecosystems, are real dollars and costs that these businesses have to absorb. If their community wants to do something different, bring their own bags, for example, they can do it a different way. So I just urge you that there are much better policy solutions on the table. In my testimony, I included uniform laws that don't intrude on local control. I know a number of you care about that and worked your way up through the city government and county government. Let's respect the right of home rule. Let's do something about the problem. House Bill 2446 does nothing about the plastic problem and the litter I see on our highways, in our ecosystems, et cetera. So I know I've taken plenty of time and be happy to answer questions. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Up next, we have Spencer Duncan, the League of Kansas Municipalities. Spencer?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be brief and get through this quick. You know, the Bible and the Constitution, right? The two things everybody knows, but not everybody's read. I'm going to push back a little on what you've heard to some degree. The constitutional amendment was not passed for uniformity. In fact, quite the opposite. And if you read it, I put it in my testimony. Powers and authority granted cities pursuant to this section shall be liberally construed for the purpose of giving cities the largest measure of self-government. Meaning it's okay if our cities are a little bit individualistic. We want to give them that authority and that ability. We believe that an issue like plastic bags is exactly why this was enacted, because it doesn't reach the level of needing state intervention. It should be left up to the cities. So as we always say, defending the Constitution is simple when it's easy. The real test is when it's hard, right? And so we just ask you, through your deliberation, keep in mind that we have constitutional home rule. It's not just statutory authority. Second thing is, this is one city. It's Lawrence. Several other cities looked at it, said not happening in our cities, and have moved on. If we were 10, 12 cities in, maybe this is a conversation that we should have at the state level. If you got 3 kids and one of them robs a bank, they don't all deserve to go to prison, right? One city out of 625 is not a reason to get reactionary and start passing legislation. It is not a trend, and I'm here to tell you we don't know of any other cities at this point that have even had this conversation. The last point I want to make is, for us, this is not an environmental issue. It truly is a local home rule. Let those conversations happen at the local level. But I will say, and it's in my testimony, these groups themselves who are opposing this have created national organizations to ban the bag. They are all moving away from the plastic bag. CVS, I believe, in some places in Kansas is now charging for the plastic bag. So it's in my testimony. You can see what those groups are and what groups they've started. So I will say, if the cities are having a concern, some of it's coming because from these users themselves have expressed to us, it's time for them to move away from the bag. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Spencer. Up next, Jay Hall from Kansas Association of Counties. And you've used up about almost 6 minutes, so we still have some time.
All right, I'll be brief. Jay Hall, Deputy Director for the Kansas Association of Counties. My testimony is going to focus not on the environmental issues or even home rule, although counties do have statutory home rule. I want to focus on one of the county's responsibilities, and that is solid waste planning. Counties are statutorily required to handle solid waste planning in the state of Kansas. This bill takes away a tool that counties would otherwise be able to use in their solid waste plan. It says that counties, you must regulate solid waste planning. However, you cannot regulate any type of packaging that is made of cloth, paper, plastic, foamed plastic, expanded plastic, cardboard, corrugated material, aluminum, glass, post-consumer recycled material, or similar coated or laminated material. So you need to regulate solid waste, just not these things in your solid waste plan. That binds the hands of our counties. I would ask you to oppose this legislation, and I'd be happy to stand for questions when it's appropriate.
Thank you, Jay. Next, we have Rabbi Moti Reber, Kansas Interfaith Action. Rabbi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rabbi Moti Reber, Kansas Interfaith Action. We're a statewide multi-faith advocacy organization that works on a variety of important justice issues. We're also the State Public Policy Office of the Central State Synod of the ELCA Lutheran Church, so I'm also representing Lutherans Restoring Creation. My opposition to the bill is based on 3 points. One Jay just made, which is that single-use plastic is a significant solid waste problem. Zach also mentioned the problems of single-use plastic. It's extremely energy intensive to produce, contributes to our ongoing climate crisis. Recycling rates are very low. The bags you take back to the grocery store are not recycled. They are disposed of. They're not biodegradable, and the pieces stay in place for hundreds of years, as Zach pointed out. And replacements are readily available, as the examples of Aldi and Costco will attest. Over 200 counties and municipalities throughout the country have enacted ordinances either imposing a fee or banning it outright. The second reason I want to dig into this a little bit. The second reason we oppose this bill is related to the first. It's nearly impossible in the Kansas legislature to even have a conversation about environmental policy. There are no committees dedicated to addressing these issues. The only germane committees, so to speak, are commodity committees like Ag or Utilities, or in this case, Fed and State. So in Kansas, struck by the indifference of the state legislature, take it upon themselves to work through their municipalities, through their local governments, to address a pressing issue. Big business or small business, industry groups run to the legislature to prohibit it. It's anti-democratic as well as anti-environmental. Terry spoke very well, and also Spencer spoke very well about local control, so I won't mention that. This is now the third year in a row that I've testified on this bill, and it's not getting better with age. I call it the Plastic Bill of Rights, and I don't think that we need it. I oppose this bill, and I look forward to it being voted down by this committee. Thank you.
Rabbi. Pardon me. Up next, we have Margaret Kramer, a private citizen. Margaret?
Margaret is not testifying in the interest of time.
Oh, there's still 6 minutes. There's Tad. Are you Tad? Okay, if Margaret would like to script, Tad, you go right ahead.
In the interest of time, yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am Tad Kramar, a retired business and regulatory law attorney, now growing vegetables and fruits in rural western Douglas County. When you took office, you took an oath to support the Constitution of Kansas. Voting for this bill would be a violation of your oath of office. Please see my written testimony for details on why this bill violates constitutional home rule. I happen to skip that in interest of time. Many people dislike mandates and restrictions from the federal government. The state should not do the same thing to local governments and their constituents. Single-use containers impose costs on cities and counties associated with litter cleanup, landfill space, maintenance, cleaning clogged sewers, and recycling. Each city and county should be able to determine the best ways to address these costs consistent with the wishes of their constituents. This is not the place for overbearing big brother government. It has been suggested that different rules by different cities exercising their constitutional home rule authority could be inconvenient for national or regional chain stores operating in multiple cities. However, chain stores already deal with many differences in local rules, such as different sales tax rates. Chain stores could also choose to eliminate dealing with different rules on this by doing the right thing and eliminating single-use plastics everywhere. That would save everyone money. It is not true that this bill would somehow protect consumers. At least 3 places in Lawrence have already eliminated single-use plastic bags. Virtually all consumers there bring their own bags. They're reusable bags. They keep using them over and over again. This benefits both the stores and consumers by eliminating the cost of plastic bags. This actually saves money. It does not cost money. It does not increase costs. It has also been suggested that plastic regulation could put businesses within city limits at a disadvantage compared to businesses just outside city limits. It is up to city leaders to consider the extent to which this could be a significant factor for their own constituents and act accordingly. And from what I'm saying, it probably doesn't cost and put them at a disadvantage at all. There are no good reasons to intervene and take away cities' constitutional home rule authority in this case. Please vote against HB 2446. Thank you.
Thank you, Tad. And finally, Nancy, and I'll probably butcher the last name, Muma? Muma. Okay, Nancy. And you've got about 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I'm here to tell you about the dangers of plastics. See this plastic credit card? We each consume this much plastic each and every week. Plastic breaks down into tiny particles. These microparticles, these tiny nanoparticles are in the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat. We can measure them in our bodies. They are dangerous. My name is Nancy Muma. I'm a PhD in pharmacology and toxicology. I am the chairman of the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology at KU School of Pharmacy. Now, I'm not representing KU. I'm here as a citizen, but most importantly as a scientist, to tell you about the health concerns of plastic. I'm not talking about the environment. I'm talking about your health, okay? So these tiny particles that we measure in our bodies carry these toxic chemicals with them. So these chemicals, called endocrine disruptors, are used in the manufacture of plastics. These endocrine disruptors alter our hormones, our estrogen, our testosterone. They alter our development of our reproductive systems. They are especially problematic for the development of unborn children and children. These products cause heart disease, they cause obesity, they cause cancer. A recent article in the Wall Street Journal documented a sharp rise in cancers in people under 50 years of age worldwide, but the increase was especially notable in North America, in Western Europe, and Australia. Another important article came out this month it's a medical journal, prestigious medical journal from the Society of Endocrinology. They documented that the healthcare burden of plastics in our country is more than 1% of gross domestic product.
30 seconds.
That is $250 billion a year. That is a huge cost. These plastics are not benign. If we could reduce single-use plastics, they take up 40% of all plastics produced. If we could reduce them by 30%, we would have a big impact on healthcare costs for all Americans, not to even consider the burden of healthcare on these individuals. I mean, this is a really terrible problem that we need to address.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
We are out of time for our oral opponents. We have 21 written oral opponents committee as well, and that have submitted testimony as well. And at this time, I'm going to open it up for questions for the committee for the oral opponents. Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my question, maybe Zach would be the best one to address. Can you tell me at this point, how do solid waste management companies handle plastic bags currently?
Well, I would say maybe Jay with the counties could talk about the solid waste as far as municipal waste goes. But I can speak a little bit to the recycling efforts and all that. I'm more familiar with that. You might, I don't know if this committee received it, but other committees have received testimony from the Kansas organizations of recyclers that were against the bill because the recycling of plastic bags is really hard, gums up the machines, et cetera, hurts the recycling process for other materials like the bottles that are more easily recycled. I included in my testimony another thing that I think is important, brought up bringing the bags to your grocery store that maybe you got them from. Well, ABC News and their affiliate down in Wichita did an investigation where they glued the trackers onto the bags and then dropped them off at Walmarts and Targets. And half of those trackers ended up at the landfill or incinerators across the country. I think, I can't quite remember what happened in Wichita, but I just remember being the takeaway was they didn't get recycled. So I don't want to belabor the point, but that's just my.
Okay, and so then it was mentioned that, if this doesn't go through, then we have a patchwork of, some areas where there's an issue potentially with the banning of plastic bags. But it seems like we already have a patchwork if certain chains and certain industries are moving away from the plastic bags anyway. So I wouldn't see how this necessarily helps eliminate the patchwork because that's already happening. But so along with that, then my question is, it was mentioned earlier that a Lawrence ban would cause businesses to implement more costly alternatives. Can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I disagree with that fundamentally. What we're seeing happen in Lawrence, so you're right, there's already kind of a patchwork of consumerism and businesses that have to deal with different taxes, demographics, different recycling rates, different amount of generation of materials and packaging, et cetera. So it's uneven as it is, but we're talking about the state, we're talking about one community that's decided to do something proactive and positive to address the litter that they're seeing in the community and what plastic bags represent in the waste stream, the environment, et cetera. What I find in Lawrence, when I go into Lawrence to do my shopping, is that, yeah, the consumers, as was said, consumers bring their reusable bags. They're mindful about taking plastic at the stores that they do shop. You can see some people carrying their products in their hands. It's a business choice what they want to do with their materials for their products. Maybe they want to switch to paper or other types, or maybe they just say, hey, we're not offering disposable plasticware anymore, or you're going to have to pay extra for that. We've seen businesses do some of that. So I don't buy the idea that it'll cost every business to do more, have more costs.
Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question's for Mr. Duncan. But as Zach's walking away, I think, Zach, you hit the point on the head, which is a lot of businesses in Lawrence are already moving away, but they chose to do that. And I think that's what's so important about this legislation is we're allowing businesses to choose best practices, and ultimately the consumers are making decisions if they're going to do the bags that are constantly used every time you go to the store. I have 3 children, Mr. Duncan, and you mentioned if one of them robs a bank, they all shouldn't go to jail.
Correct.
So I do ask then, are you saying that Lawrence is doing something wrong? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that's the power of constitutional home rule. It doesn't matter sometimes if you think it's wrong or I think it's wrong. We've given the authority on some of these things to let those cities make that decision. And just as much as we trust you when you're elected to deal at the state level, we have to have some trust in those local electeds that they've talked to their business community, they've worked with their citizens, and they've made an educated decision. I understand sometimes cities, being on a city council myself, we don't always make the best decisions, but then we learn that it wasn't the best decision. And eventually businesses stop coming into our community, people stop wanting to live in my community, and I realize, whoops, that was a terrible decision, and then you course correct. And that's what we think will happen with some of these policies is Lawrence will tell us if it was the right or wrong decision over time.
Senator Frascado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Zach. And while you're coming to the podium, I wanted to say Miss Nancy, our colleague, Senator Marcy Francisco, would agree with everything you just said. She carries her own plate and fork, and she doesn't use. Anyway, so Zach, what's an alternative to this? Thank you.
Yeah, so I offered a page in the handout in the testimony that offers alternatives. I call them policy substitutes that actually address the real issue of plastic pollution without infringing on home rule. I offer a few ideas, but I encourage the smart people in this room and the stakeholders to come together about doing something that would work for all of us. One thing I thought was maybe we could set up a dedicated campaign and action fund at KDHE to work specifically about plastic containers and bags and the single-use variety. We could offer incentives for businesses that actually reducing the plastic litter that the community is having to pay for in cleanup costs. To do something, reward them with a carrot versus then have a state mandate like 2446, telling them telling local communities what they can't do as far as their democratic rule. And then also we could do a state task force. That's something I've been pushing for a long time, is that, you know, we should get the chamber and the businesses and the environmental interests and the counties and local governments to figure out what a good comprehensive strategy might be that can say, hey, you know, let's address the issue in a variety of different ways. So I've included all those in my handout to you.
I have a question for Spencer. What would you expect the franchise restaurants, gas stations, who are uniform across the entire country to do in the city of Lawrence?
So a couple of things. First of all, we have to sometimes act in Kansas like we're reinventing the wheel. There are other states that have this issue, and some of the same retailers who are in our state are in those states, and they've figured it out. So some of them, I say, go talk to your counterparts in those other states and see how they've done it. That's the first thing. There are alternatives that they can use, and I'm sure they've had that conversation in Lawrence as to what those will be with those retailers. But I mean, that's what it comes down to. We wouldn't be the first. And again, I want to clarify. And again, even though I would defend this if 10 cities did it, we still only have one city that's done it. And at some point, I do think we have to weigh where we're passing state policy when one community does something versus all the others. And so I do weigh that in that conversation heavily.
Well, with regard to economies of scale for those big franchise restaurants, you would have to say it would be inflationary, at least for the Lawrence residents, because they will be paying a premium for whatever adjustments those franchises
All the consumers in Lawrence are going to send me nasty emails after I say what I'm about to say, and that's okay.
Yeah.
If I had a business in Lawrence and I was a restaurant, I would probably start finding whatever the alternative is, and I would probably start attaching a small fee to it. And then that, as a policymaker, again, being on the Topeka City Council, I guarantee I would start hearing from my consumers what that impact is and would probably change or alter decisions moving forward, right? That's what I would do if I was a business. And now I can get tomatoes from another side for being that honest with you, but there we are.
You can't argue with economics. That's a fact. Okay. Committee, we are out of time. We are going to close the hearing on House Bill 2446. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all the testimony. And tomorrow we'll be hearing Senate Bill 253. We are adjourned.